there is a fear of being rejected. Women especially will say, oh, that's just my personality, that's just who I am. Be kind to yourself through it, knowing there's going to be ups and downs, you're going to make mistakes, you might doubt it at times. It's all part of the process, but to keep trusting.
Hello, this is the Little Pursuits podcast where we have conversations with founders and anyone building something they believe in. I'm your host, Dar Patel, the founder and executive coach at Little Pursuits, where we help founders and leaders turn ideas into traction, one small pursuit at a time. In today's episode, we meet with Alyssa Kushner. She's a licensed psychotherapist based in New York City and has built her own private practice. She specializes in trauma, anxiety, burnout, high functioning, codependency, people pleasing, and perfectionism. In addition to individual client work, Alyssa leads women's support groups and supervises other therapists. Let's get into it. Hey, Alyssa, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Likewise, thank you for having me.
So I wanted to start by talking about your childhood. What were your interests when you were growing up? Talk about that and then go into other topics.
My childhood. So I grew up in Maryland. I was an only child, or I am an only child. And I did a lot of musical theater growing up, so it's interesting that I became a therapist. But as I've evolved and been learning and doing my own therapy, I realized that mental health was like really spoken about in my family, which is not always common. My grandmother is a therapist. I have an aunt who is in the world of therapy. Family members of mine were in therapy. I think it was just really normalized. I did a lot of work with like children, and I was always a camp counselor. I always thought I would just work with kids. I knew I wanted to help people. And then over time, as I went to college and got internships and just kind of evolved, I learned what a social worker is and what being a therapist could be.
Oh, that's great. What was that experience like in theater and that aspect? What was interesting for you about that?
I loved singing and playing piano and just like being able to express myself creatively. It's definitely something I just love music, so it's something that I will always miss. I did think I would go into music as like my career path until I found therapy. So at one point I thought maybe I could combine the two, but it was just a lot of fun and it was just a really good outlet and way to, yes, express myself and just enjoy my life at that time.
And as you got into high school and college, were there any other paths that you considered before landing on therapy?
It was really that. I would say I took a AP psychology class and fell in love with it. I was like fascinated by why people behave the way that they do. So I was interested in the human mind along with like trauma. But I didn't know if I would actually become therapist. I did think I would do something in music or music business. I kind of wanted to pursue that. And then once I actually started working in the field and learning more, that's when I pivoted. But I was lucky that I always kind of knew what I wanted between those two. And once I found it, I was like obsessed with it. So, I got lucky in that. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, I had a very similar experience. When I actually was in high school, I took like a summer course at a community college for like intro to psychology, just, very first class. And I felt the same way, which was like, I got obsessed with why do we do what we do?
Yeah. And the like human mind and behavior and yes.
Yeah. So I can definitely relate to that. Were there any doubts or detours along the way on your path to becoming a therapist?
Definitely. I mean, I knew I wanted to go to grad school for it and I became a social worker, a licensed clinical social worker. I never knew that I wanted to be in private practice actually until a little more recently. I always thought I would work in a bigger team setting. I've worked in like intensive programs, partial hospital programs, schools. So I originally thought I would do that. I never knew if I was going to be someone with a business and all of that. But then once I started thinking about the path, it all kind of perfectly fell together. But definitely challenging. I mean, all of my internships were quite tough, working I worked with children, I worked with teens, a lot of mental health and substance use stuff. So very, very challenging, yet of course very rewarding. And I always knew it was like the right path. I would go into a session or lead a group, and I would just feel very fulfilled, I guess, and guys. So I knew it was the right path.
Okay. So how did you go from working with children and teenagers to working with high achieving women?
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting path. I thought I would stay with children. I think I found that I enjoyed working with children in schools, and then teens I enjoyed working with in practice. But I think it's also like as I evolved personally, both just like, maturing and aging, and in my own therapy, I started wanting to work with women that maybe I could connect with and relate to as well. I still miss, when I worked with teens and children, but I found that my own specialties and niches ended up with women, as particularly adults, and in the private practice space. That's where I think I'm drawn to the most. I think that working with children would, for me, was a little easier in different settings like school or therapeutic programs, because it's kind of hard to work with kids via like virtual telehealth. I just found it didn't work for me as much.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Some of the topics that you cover a lot with women is this perfectionism trap. So, how does this show up for women who seem to have it all together and maybe they're kind of dealing with this?
Yeah, yes. So definitely I work with perfectionism. I also see an overlap of high achieving, highly anxious women that kind of want to do it all and be it all and have very high expectations and standards of themselves. But at the same time, it shows up in a way where no matter what they do, it will never feel like enough, because the whole thing with perfectionism isn't necessarily just like perfection. It's always doing more. And then I think it comes out in tying their worth and sense of value and competency in the external achievements or accomplishments, and often like overworking and just being super busy, just always trying to prove themselves, just being super highly critical of themselves as well. So I find it to be a lot of the higher anxiety women, that are very busy and successful in many ways too, and at work and in their relationships, but secretly kind of holding a lot of frustration and sadness and resentment at times too.
There's a lot of expectations for women, so definitely. But in your practice, where do you see this coming from, like for most women?
I see it as a lot of the times a survival strategy, like a way that maybe they learned love or feeling a sense of worthiness and all of that came from a conditional, like a parent who maybe only gave them love or validated them if they did achieve or if they performed. So not to say it's all, family dynamics, but a lot of it can come from that or from some sort of relational trauma in their lives. And yeah, just being reinforced and validated for what they're doing. I think it becomes a way to, yes, look for love, look for validation, feel a sense of worthiness or secure in themselves as well. And then it just gets reinforced over time, and it could be hard to kind of undo it and find that internal sense of self worth after that.
How can someone identify that they're maybe dealing with this? Because sometimes it could come across as like, oh no, I'm just high achieving. I have all these big goals, and so it can kind of be masked in this way. So how would someone recognize that maybe they're dealing with perfectionism? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so definitely from what we were saying earlier too, like if you find yourself just never ending high expectations that don't feel or that feel maybe achievable but never are enough, unrealistic expectations, shall I say. If you are highly critical of yourself, maybe struggle to be self-compassionate, always judging yourself, if you find that you are tying your worth to your achievements and your accomplishments, if you're always kind of staying busy and never giving yourself rest or feel like rest has to be earned, I think that's a big one. Feeling like rest is unproductive. And sometimes I think it can come up in an anxious way where if you have a deadline or where you're starting a task or a project, it actually is hard to get it started because there's so much anxiety about doing it right and doing it well. So if you find yourself procrastinating and pushing things that you need to do because you want it to be quote quote perfect, that could be a sign as well. Yeah, I think some of those are the main ones.
Does perfectionism look different in men and women?
Yeah, I think, well, there is, of course, also a bit of a society double standard, or just what I think a lot of women can be conditioned to different roles, along with men too. You know, I don't think it's just women. I think men are often still taught like to be working more and doing more and that as well. But I think it just shows up in different ways. But with the same message of just being pressured to do more than maybe they're capable of, you know?
And maybe these two things go together with perfectionism, but um, is it often coupled with like people pleasing and self doubt that kind of gets tangled in with this as well, or are those like separate things?
So I find them to be very tied, and that's kind of my niche personally of those who have a little bit of all of that. And I do think back to your previous question, the people pleasing and self doubt is a way that it really shows up in women in particular. Women are kind of taught to be very highly self critical, but yeah, I think that someone can struggle with all of that at the same time: anxiety, people pleasing, perfectionism, self doubt, struggling with self compassion. And the people pleasing is a lot of wanting to earn that approval, being afraid of maybe being criticized or rejected. I think there's often deeper needs beneath that. It's not just about, you know, being easygoing or being making someone else happy. It's really because of something like underneath that. And along with perfectionism, I think there is a fear of being rejected or a fear of being criticized, a fear of someone judging you
No,
as well.
I've definitely seen this, but also experienced some of it. You know, I think we all have a little bit of it, probably, but yeah.
So
So, how can someone go about like starting to address some of these things? What are some things they could maybe do?
I think always the first step really is acknowledging it, as maybe cheesy as that sounds. There is a lot of it's really impactful when you actually can own it. I think often women especially will say, "Oh, that's just my personality, that's just who I am," rather than see it as a way of meeting a need or a survival strategy. And so if you're able to kind of look at that and say this behavior is no longer working for me and I want to shift it, that is quite helpful. So the first step of just owning it, um, of course I might be biased, but I think obviously therapy is something that is helpful because it can help not only help you find like strategies for it, but learn the why, like where did this come from, what happened over time that this became your go-to way of, you know, surviving or behaving or just being, and then to learn how to undo it. I also think developing the act of self compassion is really important. Also, just like self acceptance, you know, knowing that human beings, we all make mistakes, that's okay. And just learning to accept ourselves for that and be kinder to ourselves.
Yeah, I think that last point is very valid, and I think hard to build that self compassion, right? So, what are some things people can start doing to just be kinder to themselves?
Mm-hmm. I always like do an exercise of having someone think about how they would be speaking to a friend in a stressful situation versus how would you speak to yourself, just to kind of see that difference. Because so many of us will say, oh, we're so kind to our friends, but like really mean to ourselves. So I think once you realize that, that can be quite powerful. And then trying to apply that to yourself. So trying to speak to yourself the way you would speak to a loved one. Um, practicing self-care, of course, like taking good care of yourself, nurturing yourself, and also just asking what it is that you need. I think that that is a major act of compassion to recognize what you're dealing with and what you need, and again, just how to nurture yourself too, just the way you would with a loved one.
Yeah, definitely. Um, One thing you mentioned was knowing the difference between like perfectionism and personality, like a personality trait. Because I think we do start to identify with it, like, oh, I'm just a perfectionist, right? And so, how is, I guess, how does that play in if you really identify with the trait, rather than knowing, like, oh, maybe this is a survival, like, coping strategy, right? Like, I
Yeah.
imagine that's a struggle to even identify that.
Yeah, it's hard, and I think that's why so many of us, don't realize that or where it comes from. I also think we live in a world that kind of like reinforces it, always doing more, always being busy, so it's hard to break that and learn how to rest and do a little less and not be so burnt out. But I do think the act of realizing that it was a way that maybe you earned that validation or approval or whatever, or love or whatever it was, can help you separate from it a little bit. If you identify it as a personality trait, I think you're more likely to just feed into it and reinforce it. Identification can be helpful in separating yourself from it. So you realize, oh, that's not who I am. That's like how I am or what I've done in order to get whatever I've gotten. So it kind of comes back to that, or well, mindfulness as well, of just like becoming aware of this thing that is not working anymore.
And I think when we're trying to make changes for ourselves, often we're dealing with a lot of judgment towards ourselves too. So, how can someone start to tackle that
Mm.
piece? And how do you maybe talk to your clients about this judgment they have towards themselves?
Yeah, I definitely use the self compassion that we were talking about before for it. Just thinking of like, would you judge your younger sister for that? Would you judge your partner, whoever, a child? Likely not. So how can you kind of apply that to yourself? And I think that especially perfectionists think that shaming themselves and judging themselves will help them do more and achieve more, when in reality, it just leads to feeling exhausted, burnt out, and even shame. So if you learn that the judgment isn't serving you in the way you think it is, I think that can be quite helpful in undoing it and shifting it.
No, I think that one's a hard one for a lot of people. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
So I also noticed you've written about like the difference between being productive and being present. What has helped you to personally maybe bridge that gap?
Mm-hmm. I think it goes back to the rest versus like always having to do something. Uh, I think especially perfectionists and women with anxiety and all of these things we're speaking about don't just sit still. Like there's always a need or desire to do more, and again to achieve more. And so there's always an emphasis on productivity versus just being present, just living life. I think that gets kind of minimized, but that is so important. Of course, we need to just have time to rest, to just be, to just enjoy life when it's not tied to something or an outcome. So I think just learning that and teaching yourself that rest is productive on its own. You need that, and not seeing yourself as like a machine that is on overdrive constantly.
Yeah, no, I worked in consulting, so productivity was like the biggest thing.
Yeah.
So I knew a lot of people, I think, who probably didn't know how to just sit back and take a break and relax. Um, what is something someone can start with, right? If you're kind of in that environment where you're working long hours and productivity is kind of the main thing in your job or the expectation,
Mhm.
how can you start to integrate a little bit of rest into your day? Are there some tips or routines that you recommend?
I would start with even just a check-in of like, how am I feeling? How am I doing? It always starts with that, just getting curious about, am I approaching burnout? Am I stressed all the time? Am I feeling anxious at work? I think, and your body will tell you, when it feels like too much. So I think those are good signs to tune into to say that you need that rest. At the same time, you don't want it to be like last second just to catch up because you're burnt out. You want it to be preventative and consistent too. Um, I think having like a morning routine, and I know that's not always possible for people, but even waking up 15 minutes earlier is better than nothing, and trying to do something that kind of sets your day on a nice tone, like getting up, going outside, of course, if you can, getting sunlight, the usual tips, journaling, practicing a little bit of breath work or a little meditation. Or it can just be something as simple as being more mindful when you have your coffee. It's just turning off the phone, not reaching for it yet, giving yourself some time to set an intention for the day. I think those go a long way. And then finding micro breaks and rest throughout the day too. So it's really easy to just be back to back and in meetings or on the computer. I do it too. But even if you have 5 minutes, going outside is better than nothing. I think with perfectionists, especially, like the all or nothing mindset happens. Like, well, I have to go out for an hour, or if I don't, then I've failed. Whereas, 5-10 minutes is a huge win, and that's just as important. So the micro self care.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a productivity tip. Well, I guess this is the opposite of what you're saying, but I think just starting is the hardest part. So actually, I'll talk about not the productivity tip, but the boundaries and break tip. Some of my clients, like, they work really long hours, and one of the tips is like, once you've shut your laptop, just put on your shoes, and that's your indication of like going outside. And once you're outside, like, going for a walk becomes much easier because you're already out there.
Yes.
So those little things can, like, if you can tie them together, like habit stacking almost, that I think has been pretty impactful.
I love tips like that too. And the ones where, like, okay, you put your shoes out, or you have something to remind you, or you schedule it in, put a reminder on your phone and do a few things at once, as you said.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I thought that was pretty cool to see that in action.
Mm-hmm.
But I also noticed that in myself. As soon as like I am right outside my door, it becomes so much easier than when I'm like sitting on my couch.
Yeah, and when you're thinking about it, I do that too. If I'm on the 18th floor in my apartment, I'm like, oh, I don't want to go downstairs, to go outside. And then when I do it, I'm like, oh my God, of course, this is amazing.
I
Yeah,
always feel better. I've never like regretted going for a walk.
100%. Yeah, these things work.
It always works. So how do you also navigate your own, like, energy when you're supporting other people, and especially this type of work, whether it's coaching or therapy, where we're constantly talking to people and they're sharing their energy with us, which could impact your own energy. How do you create some of those boundaries for yourself too?
Yeah, yes. It's been a learning process. I think, like, when I first started, this was way harder. I absorbed more of my clients' stuff. I was stressed more, and I struggled with figuring out how to work through this. But as I've developed and evolved and just, been in the field for longer and longer, it becomes a lot more natural. I'm really big on, honestly, all the things that I'm talking about too. I want to practice what I preach. So for me, like, getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep is a non-negotiable. I will go to bed early. I wake up, I go and I strength train at the gym, I lift weights. So I do a lot of my own outlets to move through the energy and process what's gone on, and just even an act of kind of just reminding myself that it is not, even though I'm here to support my clients and I do and I care, I can't take that on as mine or my responsibility to fix. That's always a helpful mantra. So, and if I had like a heavy session, I'll get up, I'll stretch, I'll move around a little bit too. I'm big on the somatic stuff, where the somatic approaches, where you really work on releasing the energy to not have it stored and stuck. And then, of course, as a therapist, I have my own therapist, I have a supervisor. I think it's important for all mental health professionals to also be talking about the stuff that we're experiencing as well, and just years of training, it gets easier and easier.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I think it's important to also have that, because I think so many people's jobs revolve around talking to people and just being in meetings, and you know sometimes you don't even notice the different energies you're taking on, and to realize like, okay, well, maybe that's not my problem, or like that's not my situation to take on, and I can set that aside. So learning that, I think, is
Yeah,
huge.
totally. And being able to say no. I mean, that took me some time, and that's something I work with my clients on, but you can say no to an extra time slot for the week, or taking a client on or something if you just don't have that time or capacity. So also learning the boundaries that you have with yourself, and working on holding them, that's been really huge for me too, especially in private practice and building a business. It's easy to want to do more and more and more. So I am learning in a different way of saying no, as I actually am now a business owner. So
Yeah. No, definitely. I think let's talk a little bit about the business part of it, right? So,
yeah.
when did you want to kind of start your own business? Like, when did that idea start to emerge for you?
So I was working at a group private practice for a long time, and my boss and I at the time, we were just talking about how I was going to be evolving. And it's funny, I look back to like my own dad is a business owner, and I never thought that I would be like taking that in, but I do think it was modeled to me that you can work for yourself, and so I never really knew if I was going to, just because I thought it was so far out of reach. But then as I started talking about it with my boss at the time, and realizing that I wanted to do a little bit more, it evolved from there. And I was very lucky that I got to build this up on the side over time, which pros and cons, I was definitely taking on a lot for a while as I built up my practice, while working for another practice too. But it was amazing. I was very fortunate because it gave me the time to not feel too pressured by it, and to take the time to build it. And I learned through that, like what I wanted, what I needed, what was working for me. I also learned how much I loved it, and I knew it was definitely for me. I do think I have the entrepreneur spirit of, I want to, take on a million other things in addition to therapy clients too. So, and then once I hit around a year, maybe a little bit more, I ended up going full time. And that was a mutual conversation. And we were talking about that, me kind of tapering off with the clients that I had there, and me taking on more of my own. So I've been full time for maybe like 6 months now. And it's all kind of worked out together, and I really love it.
That's great. I think a lot of people are doing, I guess it's side hustles, right? So you start with that and see how it grows, and then you'll kind of know when to shift into it full time.
Yeah, because there's also the financial component, and that's something, especially therapists and coaches probably as well, and don't always think about or talk about, and we don't get taught, especially in social work school. They don't teach you about it or talk to you about it, and it's kind of sometimes looked down upon. But we don't always have the luxury, of course, of just going out full time and be able to make a sustainable living too. So I think that sometimes it does require that hustle to get to a place to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. What were some challenges as you were kind of building up your practice?
I think my own self doubt came in the beginning. I mean, I've had different waves of self doubt or imposter syndrome. When I first started out, was just being a therapist, and then it was being a supervisor. I supervise other therapists too. And then this was this new endeavor. So just doing something new, which is scary, it's a change, a transition. There's a lot of uncertainty, and the fears of financial instability was a little scary. I know a lot of people like their jobs with benefits that are full time and salaried and all that because you have stability, and that is really important. So I was quite fearful. And just learning, what works for me and what didn't. It was all fun, but it was definitely a learning process. Being a therapist, I never learned about business or marketing. I found that I actually really enjoy it, which is cool, but it took time to learn about it. I had to do a lot of consulting with other therapists in private practice and coaches and just connecting with other people. So I found that it all came together and I really, really loved it. But there was some fear of, can I do this? Will this work? Will this last? Is this sustainable? Those questions.
Yeah, no, it's definitely tough in the beginning to kind of see how it will evolve.
Yeah.
Um, how did you deal with some of those topics that came up for you, like feeling like an imposter or just some of the doubt that came? That's, I think, natural when you start something new anyway, but what were some things that helped you to face that and overcome it?
I reminded myself that I've had this before and that I got through it. I like to do that when it comes to transitions as well. Like looking back, we've all been through our hardest times and have gone through. So I tried to remind myself that I used to be afraid of being a therapist. I used to be afraid of running a support group and then becoming a supervisor. And every time it worked out and I did it and I love it and I've improved upon it. And that's just also trying to bring in that self-compassion as well. The stuff that we spoke about earlier, really trying to be kinder to myself in those times. I mean, easier said than done. It's tough to actually practice these things, but I did try to apply some of the stuff that I tell my clients and that I would share with the client. So sometimes I'll say to myself, what would I say to a client right now? And I just reminded myself to give myself time, that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to have moments where things don't work. It's all a learning curve. And the beginning is the hardest part.
I think that's great. I think that's so hard to do for most people. And I think it stops people from taking that step, right, to starting something because they have the fear of failure, or
Yeah.
they're like, I don't know if it's going to work out, or all these kinds of thoughts that run through your head.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of using some of these techniques and practices can really help you to overcome that fear and to just start something. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So what have you learned building a business so far? It's been like a year and a half, right? What would you say you've learned in that time?
I've learned that, well, for me personally, I've learned that this is like completely the right path. I really do love it. I know it's not for everyone, but I realized how much I enjoyed the freedom of it, just the creative lens of it too, being able to see clients that are like perfectly my ideal clients, or for me to be able to put out the types of clients that I think I work best with. It's been really fun to do creating my website and writing blog posts and Instagram, things that I never thought I would enjoy. I found it to be a really nice outlet and just enjoyable. So I think I've learned a lot about myself through it, what works for me and my capability. I think it's helped me strengthen my own trust in myself and confidence in myself. I've noticed that kind of improve over time too. And that even if you weren't taught marketing or business or about money, that you can learn in those skills and things and just how amazing it can be if that's like the path you want to go on. And that I'm helping clients more because I now have more capacity and time and work-life balance, than working at like a program or something that I've done in the past. Again, pros and cons, but for me, my own mental health and all of that, it's just been so nice to have flexibility and all of that.
Yeah, as you were speaking, I was thinking that sounds very like empowering, right? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so you mentioned your ideal clients, and we talked about high achieving women, but does that describe your ideal client, or how would you describe your ideal clients?
Yeah, so definitely high achieving, anxious, perfectionist, along with another thing we spoke about, people pleasers. That's a big niche of mine. Clients who have a background of relational trauma, so trauma in the context of relationships or tough family dynamics growing up that they're maybe carrying now, or that shape some of these patterns we're speaking about. Codependency, too, which is putting other people above yourself, getting your sense of worth from others or from helping others. And then separately, I also like to work with clients who are sober curious. That's another mini niche of mine.
Okay, great. Um, so, anything else around your business that you want us to know about?
I'm leading a women's support group as well. So that's been amazing. And I think for any therapists out there, group therapy or support groups and coaches as well, too. I mean, support groups, programs, masterminds, all of that, I think are amazing. For me, I have so much fun with it. It's so like deeply fulfilling. And it's a good model too, I have my individual clients, and then for them to be able to, or whoever is in my group, for them to be able to also be in a group and get support from other women is just, that's super empowering. There's so much a therapist can do, but then to hear from peers about what they're going through, I think is priceless. So and then on my end, I'm bringing in a lot of my niches, so it's a women's relational trauma, anxiety, and self-trust group. So it kind of ties all of the things we're talking about, and I'm loving it, and it's been great.
Awesome. No, I think it's great that you bring up the group support because, yeah, sometimes we don't know that we need that community as much as the individual one-on-one is great. But I think hearing other people also talk about their journey and maybe even how they overcame it, and you hear more and more examples, I think it just gives you more data to say, well, I can also do it. I can also overcome this. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes you feel less alone, and then helps release shame. I think a lot of women and adults in general carry shame and feel so isolated and alone in what they're struggling with. So to be able to speak about it and, yes, feel like, oh, other people go through this too, really helps the shame over time, go away or decrease.
Yeah, definitely. So I also wanted to ask, you know, like the wellness piece, right? Like what does feeling good in your body mean to you today versus like maybe what it used to feel or what it used to mean to you?
Mm-hmm. For me, I really believe in the mind body connection. So much of our emotional health, our mental health is tied to the physical as well. And I know I personally work in that way. Like when I do get my sleep, when I move my body, when I'm nourishing my body food wise, all of that, like I feel so much better. And that's when I can show up for my clients. So me feeling good in my body is taking good care of myself. And the self-compassion too. I think a lot of women are really hard on ourselves, as we've spoken about, along with body image and stuff too. So to feel just like good and kind to yourself and your body, and take good care of your body is really impactful for your mood, for being able to manage stress, for how you feel, and for how you show up in your relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's say someone who's listening to this doesn't really know how to maybe start that movement piece, right? Or like, how do I really take care of myself? I don't know where to start. As you know, there's a lot out there, and it can all be very confusing. So, do you have some recommendations on just like small starting steps, right? Like, what are some of the small steps someone can take to start to align better with their body?
Yeah, I was gonna say that the small steps, because it's so easy to think like I have to go to the gym 5 times a week and I have to do all of these wellness things and take these supplements. It's like just go to the basics, the foundations, sleep, try to create some sort of a sleep routine and get as much sleep as you can that's possible. And then starting small. So even a 20-minute walk, a 5-minute walk, a 10-minute walk is better than nothing. It doesn't have to be jumping to going to the gym or taking Pilates. Or if you do want to try that, just trying it once a week or trying it with a friend. I think creating routines is quite helpful in all of this too, finding rituals and things that you just enjoy, and not doing something because someone else said to, but doing it because you genuinely want to, and then noticing if it makes you feel good afterwards. But consistency, that's really important too, and finding a routine that works, for the long run for you as well.
Yeah, I think the consistency piece is probably the hardest. Yeah,
Totally.
because I think a lot of people get excited to start something. There's a lot
Yeah.
of motivation. It feels good, and then few weeks go by and something starts to shift, right? Like where you lose that routine or you're not as motivated. What should someone think about doing, or what are some tips you have for that piece?
Not actually wait for motivation. I think we often believe it's waiting around to feel motivated, but you're not always going to, and that's okay. But if you still show up anyway, you teach yourself that you can keep these promises and that you can do the hard thing. So yeah, I think the small steps over time can help that, because if you get in this routine and habit of going outside, for 10 minutes once a day in the middle of your day, even when you're feeling not motivated or down, you can remind yourself of how good it felt before, and then this is your commitment to yourself. Versus if you commit to an hour walk a day, of course, when you're not motivated, you're not going to do it. That's too hard and exhausting. And what you said earlier too, like finding ways to make it the least, with the least resistance, right? Like having your shoes ready, having a outfit for the gym ready, things that just make it a little bit easier and scheduling it in. But no step towards any of this is too small. I think that's important, and that it's okay. There's going to be days where you're just not motivated and you show up anyway. And then on the flip side, there's days where you have to say no and rest, and you don't want to force it either. So it's a tough one because you want to balance the two.
Yeah, absolutely. What's like one grounding practice you return to when you're in your head or your nervous system is just kind of fried and you're a little burnt out?
I really like, so putting one hand on my heart or two hands on my heart and closing my eyes and checking in. It's that moment to connect with yourself, maybe noticing your feet flat on the floor, noticing the warmth of your hand on your heart for a second, and then asking myself that question of, what is it that I need right now? It's so simple, but it's so powerful. It's so grounding to come back to, yes, what is my need at the moment? How can I nurture myself? What do I have to do to get through the day? What can I do to practice self care? And then I also like some breath work as well, like doing a couple minutes of boxed breathing, where you hold for 4, in the shape of a box. Along with, as we spoke about, of the sunlight, just getting outside and allowing sunlight in is like so truly grounding. It's the kind of the definition of just being connected to the earth and being outside and being very much in the present moment. So I think that grounding can be small acts as well. It could be just a few moments of being connected to yourself. And then you could also, have an app. I like to use Insight Timer, and they'll have guided meditations or visualizations, if you need someone to help guide you as well.
Yeah, one of my favorites is box breathing.
Yep.
It works every time. Yeah. I don't know what it is. It just completely puts me in a different state, but also like
Yeah.
I just feel kind of like a release of stress and everything that's just going on in my head. So
Yeah, I love that one too. And then sometimes when the more slow paced ones don't work, it's also okay to do more like shaking it out or dancing and stretching, big big stretches. I think just releasing that tension in the body is so helpful too.
Yeah, definitely. No, I really love this message of movement as a way to address stress and just feeling kind of stuck in something. Because I don't think we talk about it as much. We talk a lot about like journaling and, things like that, which I think is super helpful. But this is, I think, much more immediate. So
I agree. Yes, absolutely. And it's finding the tool that works for you as well.
what business advice would you give someone who wants to build their own practice without burning out?
I would say trust in your gut and your intuition. If there's a pull to it, there's probably a reason to give yourself time. You're not going to hit all the goals day one. It takes time and slow paced intention over time to build to where you want to be and to trust in the process of that. And just to connect with other business owners and entrepreneurs, especially, of course, those in your field. I mean, I've spoken to business owners in other fields too, and that was really helpful. But yeah, asking questions and just building a community for yourself that you have support and guidance and advice, looking to people you really admire to hear what worked for them. That was a big part of my own journey too. I think it's quite helpful. And as always, like to be kind to yourself through it, knowing there's going to be ups and downs, you're going to make mistakes. You might doubt it at times. It's all part of the process, but to keep trusting.
I love that message because I think there's such an expectation of everything has to happen right away, right? Like, especially I live in San Francisco and tech, everything is about scaling and it's like, right. So I think it's, founders I talk to, they're so stressed about like just, hitting all these numbers and scaling really rapidly. And I guess in certain industries, maybe you do need some of that. But I think what you said about trusting the process and, embracing failure, I think you mentioned that earlier, and knowing that you're going to figure it out. I think those are powerful things to definitely embody a little bit more as a founder.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing from you too of that, like the pressure to look at an outcome and achievement, rather than reminding yourself of the process itself is the best part too. I mean, of course, you want to get to where you want to be, but to celebrate your wins along the way and enjoy it too, and find your sense of purpose through getting there, not just like reaching the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And even celebrating, failures, like that's you trying, right? So you also embrace that and go, well, I tried it. It didn't work. That's okay.
Yeah. And it was a message. It taught you something one way or another.
Do you ever feel pulled between being the expert and just being human? Especially, I think, as a therapist, right? It may, like, anytime you talk to someone and you say, "Oh, I'm a therapist," they might expect you to have all these answers, and I wonder what that pull is for you.
Yeah. Well, for me, being a therapist is tied to being human, or vice versa. Like, I don't believe in the blank slate neutral therapist. I think being human and authentic is what makes the right fit anyway. You could have all the trainings in the world, but it's about the connection. But yeah, it's also reminding myself and my clients and stuff that I'm not there to tell everyone the answers, that it always has to come from within. But I can help guide you to it. And at the same time, I am a therapist who is happy to give a little guidance at times, or a feedback or strategies. Again, for me, it's a two-way conversation. I work in that way. I know not all therapists do, but I'm happy to help when I can. But ultimately, it's, the client who has to find the answers within themselves and what they need and want. I can't, give that to anyone. And I don't know best. I think, yes, I'm a professional, but we know ourselves the best. And it's important to trust in that and look at that too.
100% agree. Even as a coach, right? That's not necessarily about giving the answer. It's, we can definitely point to resources or strategies that have worked or others are using, that seem to maybe provide some resource. But at the end of the day, each person has to kind of come to their own next steps, right? It's like, this is what I'm going to try next. So I definitely align with that. Um, and what
Yeah.
have you learned about growth from therapy, from building your business, and from being honest about your own limits, as said with therapy, but also maybe in the business side?
Mm-hmm. I think that growth is not linear. It's a little of a basic line there. Healing is not linear, but it's so true that growth is going to require not only stepping out of your comfort zone and doing something maybe you didn't think you were going to do or could do, but it's that there's going to be moments where you do fail, make mistakes, you're going to feel like you're growing and building, and then all of a sudden you feel like you're taking steps back. There's no one way, but all of it is part of the process. And that, as we just said, when it comes to that embracing failure, that no matter what happens, you are learning something. Even if you try to launch a business or start some sort of job and you hate it and you don't do it, at least you tried and at least you learned. It gave you that information. So kind of coming back to the theme of trusting in yourself and your intuition, that there's a reason you're doing whatever you're doing, and just letting yourself try it, and that doing something new is going to push you and make you grow in one way or the other, and leaning into discomfort because it's going to be uncomfortable and tough at times, but the more you can just lean into that and embrace it, the more you'll be able to grow.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I love that message. And based on your answer, I also see that growth is not about some outcome, but perhaps the journey, right? The process. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
What's something you're still working on? Something unfinished that you're learning to live with?
Moments of my own anxiety and being reactive to stress, I would say. I've come a long way in my own anxiety and learned how to manage and just live with it and work with it. But I can be at times reactive to my own overwhelm or stress rather than just slow down, as I'm always preaching about. But just learning to slow down and be with it and not overanalyze it. I'm an intellectualizer, so I'm always, maybe it's the therapist in me, always trying to find meaning and understand the why, which is a way to avoid rather than just letting yourself feel the feelings or get through the stressful moment. So I think that's something that I'll kind of always struggle with, but I'm learning how to work with it just as I would, tell a client to do or guide a client for.
So hard to do. So thank you for sharing that. So if a listener walks away remembering one thing from our conversation today, what do you hope it is?
It's hard to sum it up in one, but I would say the theme of self-compassion is, I always believe, is most important. To be kind to yourself, to trust in yourself, which aligns with some of the other stuff we spoke about, just trusting in your own intuition and your body, your all of that, and to just embrace that discomfort and let yourself try something new and grow from it, but to ultimately be kind to yourself, work on accepting yourself, and trying not to judge yourself when you can.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I think it's such an important message. It can be, of course, it can be done. So I hope people take it to heart and start implementing some of the things you talked about today. And what are some resources that have helped you as you've built your business,
Yeah.
or your practice, or yourself as a therapist? So this can be anything from books, podcasts, coaching, mentoring, therapy, just tools that have helped in your own journey.
So many different things. So as I mentioned before, yes, definitely therapy, super helpful for me. And then I do supervision, and I make sure that I have a community of therapists. particularly therapists who are also in private practice, so I can learn from them and ask them questions and all of that. I am a big podcast person. I love listening to podcasts. I listen to therapy chat podcasts. That's a favorite of mine. I listen to a lot of like wellness podcasts, kind of the top ones that are on Apple or Spotify. Um, and then yeah, I mean, also again doing my lifting of weights. I guess that's not as much of a resource, but just a practice. So making sure I have community, I have support, and practicing some of the tools too, like the boxed breathing that we talked about, having an app to use for meditating, um, finding routine to go to sleep to make sure I'm getting enough sleep. I'm someone who likes to kind of like look at all my habits. I have my Aura ring. I like to use that, but in order to help me figure out when I do need to rest and when I need to sleep more and things like that.
No, thank you for sharing that again. I think all these things are definitely helpful, and there's so many different podcasts and books on all of these things. But I think hearing it again just reinforces like, no, maybe if I'm not doing these things, maybe it's a good message to start.
Yeah. And I have a resource actually for self-compassion that I thought of. It's called Mindful Self-Compassion by Dr. Kristen Neff. That was something that I took a course on and helped me personally. And then now I kind of teach on it when I can and obviously talk about a lot. So that is a website. You can look it up where she shares exercises for self-compassion. She's got books on self-compassion. She also has a book of self-compassion for burnout. So a lot of the themes we've spoken about as well.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing those. So just a few more questions. Who or what helps you feel seen and safe these days?
A good question. I'm lucky to say both of my parents and my partner who I live with. All three of them are like my biggest support system. I feel very seen by each of them, heard by each of them. My partner who I live with, day to day, I tell him everything about my day and, my struggles. And he has been someone of encouraging to go this path of private practice and has believed in me along with both of my parents. So I've been quite lucky for that. And they're like my solid foundation and rocks.
That's amazing. I'm really glad you have that in your life.
Thank you.
So if you could send a message to your younger version of yourself, the one that's just starting out, what would you say?
I would say to trust, to let go, that things will be okay. The younger you are, the harder it is to believe that things can be okay or will be okay. So to just kind of trust in myself. I did struggle with self-trust for a long time. And becoming a therapist has really helped me with that. So to trust in myself and the world and life that things will be okay. They'll work out. Obviously there's hard times in life, but it doesn't have to be a major crisis. So to slow down and trust.
Great. Is there anything else you would like to add that maybe we didn't have a chance to cover?
No, I honestly feel like we covered so much and, all the different specialties therapy-wise and business-wise. So I really appreciate you taking the time and to ask all these different questions. It's been a lot of fun.
Of course. Thank you so much. And especially for the work that you do, I'm sure it's helping so many people, and for sharing all your insights and tips and practices for what's helped you and your clients.
Thank you, and likewise.
Thank you for joining us on the Little Pursuits podcast. Please follow, subscribe, and share this with one builder who needs it.